everyone. Welcome back to Punch Drunk Critics. My name is Cortland Jacoby. And today I am here. Let me start one more time because my email was going off, even though I turned it off.
Oh, so this is for sure video, right?
Yes.
Okay, let me grab my little cover. Hold on.
You sound fine. We're not super.
Oh no, yeah,
You're blurred too, but yeah.
I know, but sometimes like my sister will walk in the background or something like that.
Oh, fair. Hi guys, welcome back to Punch Drunk Critics. My name is Cortland Jacoby, and today I am here with May Abdulbaki from Screen Rant. And today we're going to be talking about part 2 of season 3 of Bridgerton, aka Pollen season. Hello, May. How are you?
Good, Cortland. How are you?
I'm good. So, it's been like a really eventful 2 to 3 months for Bridgerton fans. You weren't in our part 1. I'm wondering, what is your relationship to what I call the BCU, the Bridgerton cinematic universe? Because there's so many worlds now. Have you read the books? Do you have a favorite pairing? Like, were you
Oh,
excited
yes,
about
I
Pollen
do. I
series?
mean,
Tell
okay,
me.
so yeah, so I hadn't read initially when the seasons first started. I didn't have any of the books read. Thus far, I've had like part of Kate and Anthony's book, and then I finished Benedict's book last year. So that was my relationship to the book. So I kind of walked in not knowing too much about this world, but I might be an unpopular opinion, but I didn't love season 1 as much as everybody else did. My favorite is actually season 2. Kate and Anthony have my heart, just because it was like a very emotional story for me, and I feel like I related a lot to it, especially Kate. So it was really nice to see. Plus, like a dark skinned woman being loved on, so that was great.
Yeah. So is it safe to say that Canthony is your ship, like
Yes,
the thing you're
definitely.
excited about? Okay, cool. Well, then can I ask you, so you did like season 2. Did you have any misgivings about season 2 going into season 3? Anything you wanted
uh,
to
I mean, just concern over how they were going to handle primarily like the Lady Whistledown stuff and Eloise and Penelope's friendship, because I loved it so much, and I also felt like, betrayal and stuff like that. So like, oh, how are they going to come back from this?
Yeah.
And I have to say, I wasn't fully convinced yet about Colin being a leading man.
Right.
I love Penelope. Not so sure about Colin.
Fair, definitely fair. And I will talk about that. So for those who don't know, the second part of Bridgerton season 3 starts when they are engaged. Penelope and Colin are engaged. They're announcing it to his family. And from there's kind of a huge shadow hanging over their engagement. The fact that Penelope is, in fact, Lady Whistledown, the famous gossip columnist, who has betrayed, or Colin thinks she betrayed, whether she actually did is kind of up for debate, betrayed multiple times for writing about him and his family. So that's kind of like the main overarching thing throughout the season. There are so many side plots. We have Benedict kind of exploring his sexuality more, exploring kind of this idea of possibly being bi. We have Lady Danbury, helping Francesca find her romance and her love, but then also dealing with the arrival of her brother, Marcus Anderson. The Queen is still looking out for Lady Whistledown. Violet likes Marcus. There's so much stuff going on. What worked for you?
I really love the Lady Danbury and Violet stuff because I feel like it was like a nice transition from where we left them in Queen Charlotte last year. And I just love older women and seeing their friendship flourish and stuff like that. And also Violet, being open to loving someone again was really nice. And the fact that Lady Danbury's brother was even better. I was like, oh, okay, this is a very juicy storyline. I really like the relationship between Penelope and her mom, because I feel like
Yes.
we didn't get as much of that explored in previous seasons, and we knew, she was a wallflower. She always felt like sidelined and stuff like that. So it was nice to see their relationship blossom and what their conflict was and how they resolved it. Because I feel like, as soon as um, as soon as Lady Featherington found out that it was Penelope, Lady Whistledown, she's like, feel so betrayed. So I love to see how, that relationship kind of grew from where it was at the start of the season. I loved Francesca. I thought the actress did a really great job coming into a role that was previously filled by another. And her and John were great together. I really loved the twist at the end with Michaela, especially. I know that it didn't work for a lot of people, but it definitely worked for me. I was gasping and, having a good time with it. And I really liked the overall, like, emotional journey for Penelope, because I feel like she started in a place where she was very much comfortable with being a wallflower and being on the sidelines, and then to be thrown into the spotlight was something entirely different. And so, like, how does she manage that? So I really liked the way that it was generally resolved, and kind of her understanding the power that she did have as a writer and the people that she hurt, and kind of being sincere in her apologies towards them and trying to still be that person, but having Lady Whistledown and her be the same person, because they always have been, but now she no longer has to hide. So I really like that.
I thought that the Violet and Lady Danbury of it all worked better in part 2 than it did in part 1. For me, it really like slowed things down, because if you look at like what the beats of that story arc are, it's actually pretty fast. Like, but they drag those initial beats out for for episodes. So for me, I felt like in part 2, once it picked up, I was like fully on board in a way that I wasn't in part 1. I will say that the Mondrich storyline for me felt really, I was questioning why they were there and taking up screen time, because I think one thing that we've seen online in the last 2 weeks is that, Cortland didn't have a lot of screen time this season compared to a lot of the other, this is the 3rd season, so there's not a lot of other, but the previous 2 couples. And in terms of side plots, we have 11 this season opposed to 8 before, and I think before.
Oh wow, I didn't even count them.
Yeah, I didn't count them either. I saw that and I like went through. I was like, oh my god, there really is.
Yeah. There was definitely less romance in part 2. I felt, which could have been a lot more of that, because we kind of got a decent amount in part 1. I was like, okay. Yeah. And then after they have sex, I'm like, okay, where's the rest of it?
Right. I really liked Fran's storyline, and there's been, not to get too political, but there's been a lot of chatter on, I don't know how much you're following everything online, but there's been a lot of chatter online about Jess Brunel, the showrunner, kind of using Francesca as a self-insert character.
I have seen some of that, yeah.
And while I completely support the Michael to Michaela switch, I think that's freaking great. I do feel like because so much time was spent on Fran, a lot less time was spent on Pollen, and where it should have been. For me, I really liked. Penelope has 3 love stories this season: Colin, Eloise, and herself, which is Lady Whistledown, right? And I feel like one of those things took up a lot of the air in the room, which was her falling in love with herself, which was very much needed. But I don't necessarily know if, the Colin of it all worked. And I don't think that's Luke Newton's fault. I really do think it's the writing of the character of Colin. I don't know necessarily if the writers fully knew what to do with him. You said you didn't read his book yet, right?
Right, I did not. But I don't know how to feel about Colin, to be honest. He's never been my favorite Bridgerton. I'll just be honest about that.
Can I say why?
Yeah.
Because book Colin is more like show Benedict.
Okay. Because I've heard that. And the writing in the show always tells me that he's funny and charming. But I'm like, but I don't see that actually being played out. You have to show me these things,
right?
Like we have Benedict and his openness and his goofiness, which is great, and then we have Anthony's intensity and stuff like that, and we always see those things. But I feel like Colin is a little bit more of a closed book, and that's hard to relate to him when it's his turn to take the spotlight. So this is why like a lot of the romance for this season didn't really click with me fully, especially in like part 2, because I wasn't fully convinced of his personal journey,
I think it's fair. I think Luke gives a really nuanced performance, and I think the writing is actually really nuanced. If you like, as and if the audience goes back and looks at those individual speeches that he gives, I think they're really, some of those are really well written, especially the speech at the end where he says, you are the same person, you and Whistledown, which I think
that was his best speech.
That was his best speech. One of them, I don't know. The carriage scene's pretty great too.
The carriage scene was great. I feel like that was the peak of their romance, and I really like that scene.
I agree with that statement, the peak of the romance. But I don't know. I feel like if you're going to have a nuanced character like Colin, who is so nuanced, you got to give him the screen time for that to kind of to flesh that out. And I felt like they didn't do that, and I think that's part of all of the sidelined.
And they sort of try to turn him into, I don't know if I can curse on here, but they tried to turn him into an F-boy at the beginning of the season, right? Like, we didn't get why. I mean, you understood why, but at the same time, I'm like, did I really need to see this? Because we could have had his growth in other places. Like, he could have interacted more with other characters, and we would have seen his inner turmoil over the course of the season, but we didn't really get that. And I feel like that's can be probably hard to portray when the writing isn't there for it,
Definitely. And I personally didn't have a problem with the sex of it all at the beginning in terms of his journey, his fuckboy journey, I'll say it. I didn't have a huge issue with that. I think for me, there is this trope in romance where like the romantic hero has to be sexually skilled and experienced, even though we saw him do the same move like 3 times, but that's okay.
That's true.
But yeah, no, I didn't have a huge problem with that as much as like, I get it, right? Like he's still clearly hurting from Marina, the Marina of it all in season 1. In season 2, he addresses it with Marina directly, and she's like kind of, there's Penelope, and he's like, oh, whatever. And then he goes off to try to like protect himself in a way, right? He comes back in this like, pirate suit of armor kind of thing. For me, so we got the first 6 episodes. I was fine with those first 6 episodes. I thought they had a really nice arc and everything. I think the last 2 really bring him down. I think his reaction to the Whistledown of it all is such a bummer. And even though he's sort of like the first part of episode 7, he's mad about the Whistledown thing. And the second part of his anger is being mad that she's going to continue. It just feels like one giant big note of like mood suck. And there are little moments where they do clearly still have chemistry and he still clearly wants to be with her, but there isn't anything to break that up really. And so for me, that was really, really frustrating. For me, the most frustrating thing of the entire season was the last 10 minutes. I said this on another podcast. If I could have rewritten it, I would have had like Penelope after her big declaration of I am Whistledown. I would have had her talk to Danbury. I would have had her talk to her mother, and then I would have had her leave and go in a carriage, and then Colin follows her out. And we have sort of the same speech, but in the carriage, and then they can just like make out a little, and it's a little bit lighter. Because it ends on such a heavy note. I still feel like we're reeling from everything that happened in the previous 2 hours. And I don't know what your thoughts about that are, especially with that final like 10-second sex scene did not work for me at all.
Oh no, I was like, this, why did you even include this if you're not even going to like do anything else with it? You know what I mean? And I feel like my primary issue with the season, beyond like the small details, which, we could probably be on here for another hour talking about them, but the primary issue is the overall lack of romance, because I feel like at least in seasons 1 and 2, when the main couples were frustrated with each other, there was some conflict going on between them, or they weren't talking, or they were, whatever the case was, they were still interacting in some way or another. And I feel like we didn't get much of that, other than just kind of like Colin being pissed off and walking away somewhere, like
Kate Sharma in a coma was more satifying.
Yes, it really was. You felt that.
Yeah.
And so I don't feel like we really got as much of that because, maybe the resolution was a little bit too fast and they were trying to wrap up everything in terms of like her and Colin and her and Eloise and her and Lady Whistledown. So we could have used a little bit more time with them to kind of see the state of their relationship beyond the obvious, you know, and having those moments, even it could have been an intense moment. I don't care if they were fighting. It could have been fine. You know, at least you would have gotten that rather than ignoring. And I don't think that does anything for a narrative.
No. And I would say, you know, I have to admit, I have yet to go back and watch the whole thing all the way through, which I think everybody coming back to this, you know, from now on will have the opportunity to do so. To me, with that blind spot, it feels like two very separate shows. Like the first 6 episodes feel like something very different from the final 2. And so yeah, I don't know. I kind of also had a huge issue with some of the like body positivity stuff. You know, this was arguably the season for that kind of representation. And I feel like, and I pointed this out on a different podcast as well, that they didn't have a person of a larger size or whatever you want to say in the writer's room at all. And I think for me, as someone in a bigger body, it definitely showed. That final 10 minutes was really frustrating. Obviously, like Penelope's wearing a robe. Like it's one thing to have a woman ride a dude, which is like really empowering and hell yeah, love that. But then you have her kind of covering up behind a robe, which I feel like story narrative wise would be so powerful if she wasn't wearing it at the end of like,
I agree.
Literally nothing between them. She's on top. He's okay with it. There's this like nice little power dynamic there. And I don't know, I would be fine with no other affection if there was no rope. And then the immediate mommification of Penelope at the end, which I mean, I don't need to tell you, like, is, you know, if we see fat women on screen, and I'm not saying Nicola Coughlan is fat for our audience, but when we see larger bodies on screen, they're in mother roles, they're in caretaking roles. And so for me, that just kind of felt really one note and kind of like a downer of like, you did this entire thing to empower her and then you're making her mother. So my question for you, as we kind of wrap up our little mini-sode here, is where do you see Pollen next season? And where do you see Bridgerton going forward, right? Is it still this
great question
mammoth that this season was?
I would like to hope not. Because, and I know that it's only renewed through season 4 and we have 8 books, you know, because there are 8 kids. But I would like to see more focus on whoever the main couple will be. And I hope that that's Benedict. I feel like we've been waiting forever for that at this point. So I would like to see them slow down a little bit and kind of like enjoy the characters and not try to maybe expand the world so much to the point where it feels like they're making up for the lack of, you know, Daphne and Anthony as an example, because we could have gotten more storyline with him and Kate, but that did not happen. And I would have liked to see that more than some of the other stuff.
I think the exit of Ray Gage on Page in season 1 really set a precedent for the leads to leave like soon after. And like Jonathan Bailey, who plays Anthony, has been so busy filming other stuff. I really think that like Jess Brownell has said in multiple interviews that like she thinks Penelope's storyline has more to go. And I'm sure she's talked about this with Nicola. So I assume that Pollen will be more active in season 4 than previous couples were the season following theirs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I hope so, honestly, because I feel like, and I would say this about even like, you know, Penelope and Colin and Anthony and Kate. I would love to see more of them. Like, just because you had your happily ever after doesn't mean there aren't other things that are going on in your life, you know? So it'd be really nice to see more of that, more of their bonding, maybe. Just having a more complete idea of what their relationship looks like. And I'm really interested to see where the Lady Whistledown stuff goes too, because now she's, you know, she doesn't have to hide anymore. So I wonder what that's going to look like with all the gossip and the ton and their feelings on the matter. I think that could be an interesting subplot, in addition to whoever the main love story is.
I want Colin. I think it's also a really good opportunity. A lot of fans have come out and say, hey, we were really unsatisfied with the amount of like Colin intimacy this season in terms of touching, in terms of like not even just sex, just like in terms
Hmm.
of like touching and being near each
Yeah,
other.
like just having some heat in
Yeah.
a scene, you know?
I want Colin touching her at all times. I want a finger on her or in her the entire season. Um, period. Like that's what I need from Jess. I would love for them to have like a really good arc, like an actual arc, not just like, Canthony had explanations of why they weren't there. And so I would really love for them to have a full arc. I'm hearing you say that you're like sure that it's Benedict's season.
I want to think so because I feel like, and it could be Francesca's season too. I mean, but I would be okay with Francesca having a subplot because if you know what's
Yeah.
going to happen in the books, I would rather have it simmer a little bit before we get to that point
She
fully.
needs room to breathe. Yeah, that
Exactly.
story needs room to
And Benedict, I mean, it's been 3 seasons and I feel like they don't know what to do with him anymore. And I'm not saying that his storyline this season was bad, but it just took too long to get to that place, right?
I
Go
think
ahead.
too that the writers don't know what to do with him, but they very much like Benedict. And I think they
Yes.
really like Luke Thompson in a way that I don't necessarily know if they do for Luke Newton, which kind of came through this season.
Yes.
But like I think they really like Benedict. So I could see them go either way of like, we want to give him one more season to kind of F around and see what happens. I see it more Eloise or Benedict, to be honest
Hmm.
with you. I think
Yeah.
her going away to Scotland leaves a lot of, area open to writing letters, which is like the beginning of her book. So yeah, I think it could go in either direction. I'm really interested to see what Netflix is planning in terms of a press tour, because I think half the fun of this, not half, like 60% of the fun of this season was watching Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton kind of be themselves
Oh
together.
yeah. That was
Um,
really fun. Also, I
yeah.
would like to them to bring back the Bridgerton fever experience because I am a fan.
Would you? Because it was a lot. Like I don't know how they're ever going to top that. I mean, it made sense that they did a world tour this time, right? Because like
Yeah,
is a world traveler. I don't know how they'll like be able to keep the hype and momentum of this season.
that's true. I mean, we'll see, but it would be, it would be cool.
I'm not saying that Benedict or whoever has it doesn't deserve it, because they do, but I'm just saying, like, I think it's going to be really, really hard to top, especially because I know multiple people who love the show that like said that they're done. So
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard the same to be honest, and it's really disheartening because, you know, I feel like whenever a new showrunner comes in, there for me personally, every show I've watched and a new showrunner comes in is always a little bit of a dip in quality and storytelling, and I feel like this happened so soon into the show
yeah,
in general. Like season 3 is rarer for a new showrunner to come on. Um, and I hope that, you know, Jess Brownell takes that criticism and kind of betters season 4. I read an interview where she was basically saying that, her and her team are at their best right now, the best writing that they've ever done. And so I really hope that that's the case,
I
because
hope so too. It's frustrating that it's like, oh, well, a season in, we're at our best. And it's like, well, where was it last time? Like, shouldn't
yeah.
putting your best foot forward? I don't know. I have a lot of problems with Jess Burnell and her interviews. Like, there's a lot of stuff she said that I find pretty problematic.
Mhm.
But we don't need to get into that. But so continue what you were saying. Sorry.
What was I saying about of new showrunners and stuff like that?
Yeah.
So I do hope that they just learn and bring in more romance and more focusing on, like, they can focus on subplots. That's just fine because Bridgerton is generally an ensemble show too. So there's a lot of people that they have to service, and I understand that. But they could like either cut down or evolve more, of the main cast to get bigger storylines and more something that feels a little bit more well-rounded, I think, in their personal journeys.
Absolutely. And I think one way to, not to get too specific at the end, one way to do that, what that would also help out Eloise's story, is to deal with the Marina of it all. It was
Hmm.
mentioned a lot this season, and she was kind of used as a like, what about Marina? But like none of it was really explored or dove into, or like Penelope has a complicated relationship with her. Colin definitely does. There was no discussion between the two of them. So maybe that's something that could bring up. I think this is a way to like, if they do it right, could close out a bunch of storylines and kind of for season, I guess this would be season 5, kind of like, start more fresh. Because I think that Nicola Coughlin's career is going to be blasting off in the same way that Jonathan Bailey's is. So like, who knows if we'll have her in season.
If it isn't already, I mean, I think she was filming 2 shows at the same time. Like she's filming Bridgerton and another show, which is wild.
Now she's filming like that, like British children's book series. I think it's just a film, but the books were a series. And I think she's doing like another like biopic as well. So we'll see. I hope that she has a large storyline because I think she's talented. So
I hope so too. I mean, I never like to see people leave. So it would be nice to have, if we're gonna do Bridgerton, you can't, they all leave, who's gonna be left to share the family dynamic? Because and I think that's one of the best parts of the show.
I think they'll lose fans over that too. I think that that's a huge drawback of like the way that this revolving door has kind of been set up. Like you're going to need past couples to have a storyline as big as Benedict has been getting lately.
Exactly.
In order for it to continue in good quality. So that's just a few of our opinions. We didn't even talk about the music of it all. We didn't talk about the costumes or any of that. This is just purely a story mini-sode for you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Again, you can find May at Screen Rant, and you can find me on Punchline Critics. And thank you guys so much for watching.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're laying down, please subscribe to our channel and click the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest stuff.